Chapter 19. It occurred to Gavin that if his father had any idea he'd end up sitting in the Azure Dianaga cantina, he'd never have let him leave the farm. If Mos Eisley was considered the armpit of the galaxy, this part of Coruscant could be considered anatomically lower and decidedly less hygienic. In the dim distance, in an alcove between the bar and the doors, Gavin could see a Kubaz quartet playing trunk flutes and percussion, but the din caused by hundreds of aliens speaking all at once walled away the sound of their music. Acrid green smoke drifted through the cantina's atmosphere, stinging Gavin's eyes and painting another layer of grime across his face. Down in the lower reaches of Invisisec, he'd taken to wearing all of his clothes in layers, rotating the inner layers to outer, and had been at it for the week since they'd landed. He felt he smelled like a dewback with bloat, but the worse his scent became, fewer were the complaints from the various aliens with whom they dealt. The mission given to their team had been quite broad. The top two items on the agenda were to determine the level of control the Empire exerted over the lower reaches of the city and the general mood of the alien population on the world, and to find out if the lower levels of the infrastructure would provide avenues of attack against the government. That seemed logical to Gavin because if Coruscant were built on a foundation the government didn't control, bringing it down would be just a little bit easier. Since their cover story had Gavin and Shael working as partners, they had traveled independently from the others and had spent a great deal of time exploring the tunnels and ruins at the bottom of the world. The Shistavan and Wolfman had suggested they begin their exploration near the Invisisec border because if there was no way to leave Invisisec and penetrate the newer sections of the city, any invasion force that made planetfall on Invisisec would be bottled up. The border proved fascinating because of the melange of building materials and architectural styles all jammed into a very small area. Where the huge construction droids had carved a swath that nibbled away at Advisisec, the walls were formed of sheer ferrocrete, with no pre-constructed access ports to the other side. No matter how new those walls looked, all of them had been covered with colorful writing, most of it being anti-imperial invective, or it had been gouged by sharp claws or nibbled by sharper teeth. Borats appeared to be the pioneers that opened holes in these solid walls. The holes appeared to be about twice the size of a pilot's helmet, with claw marks that striated the cone shape going in and coming out the other side. Clearly, sapient beings had expanded on some of these holes, enlarging them to permit easy passage for most creatures. Some of the holes had been resealed, but the ferrocrete patches could be removed if they were chipped away at the edges, and in at least one case, a plug had been hinged so it looked normal from the far side and could provide easy access to areas outside Invisisec. The perimeter of Invisisec, where the residents were moving out and taking over buildings previously outside their sector, was known in local parlance as the Outer Rim. There, the holes through the ferrocrete walls were numerous and large enough to permit all sorts of commerce. Where the Imperials made an effort to stop the migration of aliens, all windows and doors had been sealed with ferrocrete plugs. Messages splashed on walls indicated points where people suspected the imps had set up booby traps. Arcane sigils and graffiti in more languages than Gavin knew existed marked the area of fights where imps had killed people to prevent the sullying of new territory. The Outer Rim clearly provided more opportunities for an invading force to push into the city proper, primarily because the walls there were not as strong as the barriers on the other side of Invisisec. That fact, however, would be the only bright spot in an otherwise very gloomy report. After days of wandering through the dark and twisted alleys and byways of Invisisec, the vast scale of the invasion needed to wrest the planet from the Empire began to press in on Gavin. The planet had billions upon billions of people. The force needed to pacify the populace and maintain order while fighting against the Imperial stormtroopers would have to be incredibly huge. It would take more troops than the rebellion has under arms. The shields make this place a tough nut to crack, but chewing up the meat isn't going to be any easier. Gavin hunched forward on the table in the corner booth and gripped his mug of llama ale with both hands. Prospects don't look so good, do they? Shael lowered a mug from his muzzle and wiped excess ale off on his sleeve. If there's no prey, there's no reason to hunt. Norara Ven and Risati Yanura cut through the smoke and slid into the booth, forcing Gavin to slide around towards the center of the semicircle. The Twi'lek's clothes were worn in only one layer, were more conservatively cut, and decidedly cleaner than the ragged things Gavin and Shael wore. Rysati wore a skin-tight dark blue body stocking supplemented with knee-high boots, belts, chains, and other strap-like accessories that accented her already considerable charms. Gavin forced himself to meet her stare, then blushed when she winked at him. Nawara raised a hand and waved a serving droid over. Churban brandy for me, or the closest synthesis you can manage. She will have a Durand fire, light on the phosphorescent agent. He settled a brain tail over Rosati's shoulders as the droid scuttled off, then nodded to Oral and Errol Nunnab as they joined the group. All alive and well, I see. Oral tapped himself on the chest. Gand has traveled extensively and has found much exotica. Items are available from throughout the galaxy at prices that reflect the distance they have been shipped, not any restriction on supply. Nawara rhythmically tapped his fingernails against the scarred and stained tabletop. Estimates on how long those goods would last? Errol cocked her head. A month, perhaps more, provided Imperial interests did not stage raids. The Imps appear to monitor trading. Everything seems to pay protection to the Imps, to Black Sun, and to the local Invisisec factions. If things were to get tight, some of the things here would be pulled outside. Gavin exchanged a glance with Shael. The Wolfman had said that he would have opted to starve the Imps out by blockading the planet. He estimated they could survive for 2 or 3 months. Errol's estimation of the supplies in Invisisec meant that the alien population of Coruscant would be hurt worse by a blockade than the Imps would. Given the anti-alien bias the Empire had, that sort of result wasn't surprising. If Hassan Assard was smart, she'd ransom the Invisisec population for supplies, or she'd just have them killed and take their supplies for the humans. The general din of the cantina faded, then died as Imperial stormtroopers came through the doors. They wore the standard white armor seen across the galaxy, though they did have small pinpoint spotlights clipped to their right shoulders. 2 soldiers remained at the doorway. They were armed with heavy blaster rifles, while the rest of the squad broke down into a pair of 3-man groups that began to work their way around the dark oval room. Back through the doorway, Gavin thought he saw more troopers and a large vehicle, but the swirling smoke and general gloom made a positive identification impossible. Errol kept her voice low. Another sweep? Nawara nodded, but remained silent. The various alien denizens of the bar shifted around anxiously. The Godel, seated back to back with Nawara in the next booth over, ducked his head, giving Gavin a clear view of the stormtrooper centered between the Godel's horns. Gavin killed a smile as he recalled stories about Godels being able to read minds. It'd be very interesting to be able to know what's going on inside those helmets, if anything at all is. I wonder what they're after. The knot of stormtroopers nearest the robes stopped at a table where 2 squid-headed Quarren sat conversing with a tall Duro. The leader of the stormtroopers demanded identification cards. He ran them one at a time through a slot on the data card attached to the armor on his right thigh, then returned one card to the Duro. You two will come with us. The stormtroopers behind him brought their blaster carbines up to cover the Quarren. What have we done? Routine inquiries. You have nothing to fear if you have done nothing wrong. The Quarren, pulling the robes tightly around them, rose from their stools and scurried out. No one stared at them, but everyone seemed to be watching them go. Gavin could feel resentment rising in the room as it rose in him. The second trio of stormtroopers found no one interesting to harass, so they backed to the door while the first set of troopers approached the rogue's table. The leader demanded Gavin's identification with an outstretched hand. Far from home, aren't you? ID, now. Gavin fumbled for it, then turned it over. The stormtrooper ran it through his datapad slot, but didn't return it immediately. I asked you a question, son. What are you doing here? Ah, I'm just here. Gavin fought to stop panic from choking him. The stormtrooper snapped the ID card on the table. I have reports that say you left home under strange circumstances. Maybe you want to come with us and return to your own kind. We won't let them hurt you. No, I'm fine here, really. The trooper shifted his attention to Rasati. Identification. She snuggled tighter beneath Noara's brain tail and flicked her pink tongue salaciously over the gray flesh of the Twi'lek's throat. Noara reached inside his tunic and held up an ID card between the second and third fingers of his right hand. As he lifted it towards the stormtrooper, Gavin saw the outline of a black triangular coin worth 100 credits. You don't really need to see her identification. The stormtrooper took the ID card and neatly palmed the coin. He held the card up to compare the hologram with Rasati, then tossed it down in anger when she turned her face towards him and winked. Your kind makes me sick. As does your kind, which is why I'm with him. That rocked the stormtrooper back on his heels for a moment, and he seemed about ready to go for his blaster when a buzzing came from his helmet. He touched the side of it with his left hand, then turned to his two companions and jerked his head towards the door. Looking back at Nawara, he said, You're lucky this time, spoiler, but I'd be thinking about finding a new friend. It wouldn't do to have this one crying over your ashes, would it? Perhaps not. Definitely not. Remember that. The stormtroopers withdrew, and darkness again descended on the Azure Dionica. The conversational tone remained low, which allowed some of the band's music to make it over to the table. Over near the doorway, Gavin saw some figures get up and begin to sway or writhe in time to the music, though the twitching of one person led him to believe that some of the notes were being played well outside the range of his hearing. Errol appropriated Gavin's ale and downed a healthy swallow of it. That was close. Gand has previously avoided such contact. Gand has seen Imperials rounding up others, both Quarren and Gamorreans. Shael nodded. The kid and I saw a family of Gamorreans herded off. The stories we've heard indicate occasional sweeps taking in Gamorreans and Quarren on a weekly basis. They take a dozen or two. Nawara Ven scraped talons along his jawline. Perhaps there has been an anti-Imperial uprising on Gamorra. That would explain the taking of Gamorreans. Errol's garnet eyes sparkled in the backlight of the glowing drink the service droid placed in front of Rasati. Why the Quarren? Nawara dropped a 10-credit piece in the slot on top of the droid's head and drew his brandy from the tray. Quarren share the same world with the Mon Calamari, but the two populations are not wholly united. Perhaps they want to exploit the enmity between them. A petite, black-furred female Bothan came walking over to their table and smiled invitingly in Gavin's direction. A diamond of silken white fur covered her from throat to navel, it being visible beneath her sleeveless jacket's loose lace enclosures. White also sheathed her hands and carried up to her mid-forearm. A blaze of white fur blossomed in the middle of her brow and splashed across her left eye and cheek to where it narrowed again at the corner of her jaw. Her light violet eyes shone brightly in contrast to the fur surrounding them, giving her a penetrating stare that sent a quick jolt through Gavin. Nawara looked up at her. Is there something I can do for you? I think not, sir. She picked up Gavin's identification card, read it, and gently set it down again. I noticed how you dared defy that stormtrooper, Van Leaguer, and I thought perhaps I would like to learn more of a man who can be so casual in a place where so few of his kind are found. I thought we might discuss this privately. It took Gavin a half-second to remember he was Van Leaguer, but that was because he'd not recognized himself in her description of the encounter with the stormtrooper. She must have somehow confused me with Navarra, but she's looking right at me. Um, I am I'm here with my friends. She nodded politely. Of course. You would not want to abandon them. I understand. The Bothan glanced back over her shoulder towards where people were dancing. But surely they would not begrudge my stealing you away for one dance. Uh, we're discussing something right now. Perhaps another time, Miss. I am Asir Silar. Her smile slackened slightly. Another time, then? Yes, certainly. A Godel seated in the next booth over turned around. He's lying, Asir. Your approach made him nervous, and your retreat filled him with relief. As the horned humanoid came around to face Gavin, he produced a blaster and pointed it at the rogues. Out of the corner of his eye, Gavin saw a seer move, and a small blaster appeared in her right hand. While he saw no more guns, he heard a crescendo of safety switches being snapped off, so he instantly rejected the idea of digging for his puny holdout blaster. Nawara's voice took on an edge, the sort of edge Gavin imagined it had when the Twi'lek had fought for his clients in court. Would anyone care to explain what my friend has done wrong here? Is it a crime to refuse to dance in the Azure Dianica? Not at all, but his relief shows him to be as much a bigot as the stormtroopers who just left here. A seer tapped Gavin's ID card with the muzzle of her blaster. If he'd not lied, if he'd accepted my invitation, we'd have known he's like your woman, someone to whom species makes no difference. Since he's a bigot, we have other uses for him. And those would be? The Bothan smiled coolly. The imps have been kidnapping people from Invisisec, and they've not returned them. Something has to be done, so we've formed the Alien Combine. We need someone to take a message to the imps to let them know we'll tolerate their predation no longer. Your friend has elected himself to fill that post, and this will be one time when a dead man will tell a tale. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.